Should India reciprocate the United Kingdom's ridiculous and frankly discriminatory vaccine policy? That is a question being asked after a statement made by Foreign Secretary of India Vardhan Shringla today in response to questions on how India would really react to this policy. So simply put, the UK's vaccine policy now puts all countries into a red list. This is all except a few. Now, in this red list of countries is India as well. You have India, UAE, Thailand, Russia, countries in South America, countries in Africa, which essentially means that no matter what jabs have been received by people coming from these countries, whether it's Pfizer or Moderna or Covishield or AstraZeneca, it does not matter. If they're coming from these countries, they will be treated as unvaccinated, will have to undergo 10 days of quarantine. Now, what is puzzling is that it does not take into account that India has actually sent 5 million doses of Covishield to the United Kingdom on their request, which they use to vaccinate their population. So this really puzzles everyone who's listening in. So let's listen into what Foreign Secretary Vardhan Shringla said in response.
The basic issue is that here is a vaccine, Covishield, which is a licensed product of a UK company, manufactured in India, of which we have supplied 5 million doses to the UK at the request of the government of the UK. We understand that this has been used in the national health system, and therefore non-recognition of Covishield is a discriminatory policy and does impact on those of our citizens traveling to the UK. The Honourable External Affairs Minister, from what I understand, has raised this issue strongly with his counterpart, the new Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom. And I'm told that certain assurances have been given that this issue would be resolved. If we don't get satisfaction, we would be within our rights to impose reciprocal measures.
Dr. Shahid Jameel with us this evening on the show. Dr. Shashank Joshi speaking to us today, as is Sushant Sareen. Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us this evening on the India Development Debate. Let me go across to Dr. Shahid Jameel first, who I believe is in the United Kingdom and facing first-hand this discriminatory treatment. Am I correct, Dr. Jameel?
Yes, Tamanna, that's true. I arrived in the UK on the 8th of September. And till last Saturday, I was in home isolation, even though I've had 2 jabs of Covishield. So yes, I've experienced it firsthand, and it makes it even more difficult because the weather is so fabulous and I have to stay at home. But nevertheless, I've been out now at work. But yes, I was listening to your show, and this is discriminatory and completely baffling. It's certainly something that's not driven by science. It is driven by other matters, maybe political, maybe whatever it may be. And the fact that Covishield or Vaxzevria or whatever you may call it, produced in the same factory, when it is given to people in the UK, it is kosher. But if it is given to people in India, it's not kosher, tells me that it has nothing to do with the vaccine. I think what the UK possibly suspects is our vaccination program rather than the vaccine. So let them come out and say whether their problem is with the vaccine or the vaccination program. It certainly doesn't appear to be a vaccine-related issue.
Well, what then could be the issue? Dr. Shashank Joshi, are you giving benefit of doubt to the United Kingdom that maybe they have a problem in, recognizing whether we have legitimately administered these vaccines?
No, I think that is complete distrust. And it is very sad and inappropriate and intemperate on their part. In fact, if their whole policy is very discriminatory, if we need to eradicate COVID from planet Earth, we need to be inclusive and we need to grow beyond vaccine nationalism. And this is far beyond that. I agree with Dr. Professor Jameel completely that there is something more than what is amiss. See, Oxford University licensed this officially and legally to Serum Institute to make Covishield, which is the largest manufacturer of this type of a vector vaccine. And they have taken the same vaccine in UK, which is valid, and not for people who have taken it in India, is grossly discriminatory. I think there is some serious error of judgment there, and I hope better sense prevails on them and they make a correction earliest. And I'm very sure that our diplomatic missions at the highest level will sort this issue amicably. But I'm very pained and sad that even in 2021, on the 21st day of the 21st century, we have to go through this type of a situation.
Absolutely. Sushant, very strong words coming in from the Foreign Secretary today, and he also talked about how India would be well within its rights to reciprocate. Do you think we need to go that far, or will the UK see reason? And also we need to keep in mind that this is not specifically for India. There is a list of countries in which India also happens to be there. I mean, it's ironic if India is there because we're giving Covishield in the largest doses, which is basically the AstraZeneca vaccine.
So I'll just come to the Foreign Secretary in a bit and how the Indian government has handled it. But look at the ridiculousness of the situation. The British have taken Bangladesh and Maldives, which have got most of their vaccines from India, out of this list. Okay, so we have sent about 1 crore, 10 million vaccines to Bangladesh, most of them Covishield. So a Bangladeshi injected with Covishield can travel without being on the red list. A person from Maldives can travel without being on the red list. But a guy from India who's got the same vaccine will have to go into a quarantine. Can you imagine something more ridiculous? Second, you have a country like Pakistan, which has those trashy Chinese vaccines being given to them, and they have been allowed, they've been taken out of the red list. Now, if this is not politics, what is? So it is quite clear that the British government has shafted India, number one. Number two, and had done a gesture to countries which have a diaspora, which asserts itself, which does violence on the streets, which does all sorts of other activities on the street. So they have been taken out, number one. Number two, where I have a problem with what the Foreign Secretary is saying, why do you need to say this? Do it. Why do you need to say we will take reciprocal action? Because the moment you say it, it sounds like you're pleading with these guys. When you know, look, I can understand that there was a reason and there was a valid reason, like many countries had imposed certain quarantine restrictions across the board. I can understand that. But this is pure and simple, not even discrimination. I think it's pure and simple politics. And it is pure and simple typical British politics which is being playing out. Now, that's the second point. The third point is that, look, the Brits are not the only one who've done it. The Canadians have done it for the longest. People who had to travel from India to Canada had to take a circuitous route just because the Canadians refused to accept an RT-PCR test done in India. As a result, a ticket which would normally cost you 80,000 bucks started costing you 1,60,000, 2 lakhs, 3 lakhs also for students who had to go and study in Canada. Now, if this was not discrimination, what was it? Could they not have designated certain, their own people, when you go to Canada, you go for a medical test, they have designated places where you go for those medical tests and those reports are taken seriously. Why could they not have designated, some of these laboratories for that? They could have done it all across India, but they didn't do it. They've been bloody-minded about it. Okay? So you've had these instances, time and time again, and invariably what has happened is that the Indian government has just threatened by threatening to retaliate. And ideally what we should do is that if the British are putting a 10-day quarantine, we should say that any person who's coming from Britain to India will have to go a 21-day quarantine and will have to take vaccines which we will charge in pounds the same amount or even more than what the British are going to charge. Let's do it. But Tamanna, just one last point. Why we will not do it? Because of visa power. Because the Indians are going to be so desperate to travel to the UK, and perhaps the same amount of desperation is not in the UK to travel to India. And that is it. And the moment you take this tough decision, you will have Secretary of India, you will have ministers, you will have MPs,
yes,
upon people in the government, ke yaar bacche ka visa karwa do. Now, if you do that, the game is up. And that is what these guys play on.
No, and also I'm glad you brought in the question about Canada, because it is a bigger issue. It is a bigger global question about how we're going to move past COVID-19 if countries refuse to recognize each other's vaccines, and everyone's doing it in some way or the other on their own part. The Chinese want to recognize only Chinese-made vaccines. There are other countries, the EU at some point was saying we will only allow certain number of vaccines. We already know about students going to study in American universities who've had to be jabbed again if they've had Covaxin. So, Dr. Jameel, isn't this the worrying part? That is the issue, no faith in the actual vaccine? Or does this display a lack of faith in the medical bodies of those countries who have given green signals to those vaccines? So, do those bodies know what they're doing? Or is the issue about trust in the system of those vaccines? Are there fake vaccine certificates? Have these people actually got vaccinations? Where do you think the problem really lies? Or is it just an assumption that certain countries will not do a good job of this? They'll probably bungle it up, so we don't trust them.
Well, I really don't think it's a problem of quality of Indian vaccines. I mean, India supplies more than 60% of vaccines, childhood immunization vaccines globally. So, you can't be talking about the regulatory framework or the quality of vaccines. After all, Indian companies are the primary companies that would be supplying vaccine to the COVAX program. So, with this sort of policy, are you sending the signal that, supplying to poorer countries, you can give any vaccine, but if you supply it to developed countries, you need to have a certain benchmark. I think this whole business has become quite ridiculous. It is not based on science. It is based on politics, and politics has taken center stage in COVID, whether it's the global scene or whether it's in my country in India. Everywhere, politics has started dominating this. And we should just get away from this. We should get away from this ridiculous situation. And I think the Foreign Secretary, the External Affairs Minister is right in saying that, we can also impose, these kinds of conditions. But I do not subscribe to the view of Sushant that we should have gone ahead and did it. Being more ridiculous than ridiculous doesn't solve the problem. Two negatives don't make a positive in this case. And I think that the British have possibly understood our point of view, and we would look forward to a resolution of the situation soon.
Yeah, this was the question a few months ago as well, when the UK first said it was not recognizing Covishield. That's when Serum Institute of India came out and said that, they're hoping the issue will be resolved. After this, Covishield did get recognition from the World Health Organization as well. Dr. Joshi, is it fair to say that in the post-COVID era, countries that are producing vaccines that are not in the Western nation category or in the first world category just have to walk a mile harder or a mile further to prove themselves?
Probably right, but I think let me tell you a couple of things. One is COVID is predictably unpredictable, and people behave in a very unpredictable way. And I think this is a classic example, and this is across all pandemics. If you see history of pandemics, non-scientists have got center stage. And this is completely ridiculous. I agree with both my panelists that I think the diplomacy will be put at its highest. And I totally, completely agree with you that yes, actually, if you ask me, there is a boomerang. If Pfizer, which is touted to be the best vaccine, after 3 doses in Israel, is still having the highest number of cases in Israel. So what are we touting? We are self-reliant. We should be proud of India. We have made our own vaccines. We have partnered with the right strategic players. Oxford partnered with us. We have a very good relationship with United Kingdom. I think better sense should prevail. And I think our diplomatic channels should be opened. and we will be able to sort this issue out. I am reasonably optimistic on that front from the British standpoint. But as far as the global scenario of the first world versus second world, I think this is a game changer. If you ask me, the best of care has not been necessarily been available in US or Europe. I am not so sure of that. And therefore, maybe after a year or two, we'll really know in the final analysis who performed better than whom. We are not here to compare and contrast. We are here to fight a single enemy called COVID. I think people have behaved inappropriately. And I think this is also another example of inappropriate behavior of a particular country. But rather than targeting that, I think we should resolve it amicably. And I feel this would be done. But I think it is really sad. It pains me that these type of struggles have to be felt by us. And it's not fair.
You're right. It's not fair. Sushant, where are the solutions? Do you really mean it when you say that we should also get, people from UK to quarantine for 21 days and charge them more for vaccines if they want to come here? Perhaps many will not. Or do we need to look at a forum on a global level where this issue can be settled, not just from India's point of view? Eventually, for the world to move on, countries will have to recognize each other's vaccinations, their systems, as well as the actual vaccines.
And that's true, Tamanna. And yes, you will have to move into that direction eventually, right? But the thing is that what we are talking about is the immediate crisis. There are people who have to go and study in the UK. You are now inflicting this thing on them. And then you are going to charge them, I don't know, some obscene amount, $50,000 or something for the vaccinations now. You can't do this. This is not fair. And which is why where I disagree with Dr. Jameel is that, look, until and unless you are going to take reciprocal action and retaliate in an equal measure, if not a greater measure, the penny just doesn't drop. It just doesn't happen. And we've seen it time and time again. So, for the British to, for example, if they turn around and say that, well, there have been a few cases of fake vaccination. Yeah, maybe. But how can you tell me that there have been no cases of fake vaccination in Britain, where there are so many anti-vaxxers, in the US, in many other countries? Now, if you want to, pick up those isolated cases and make them into the rule and then fling it at me, I can do the same thing. And I don't see why I should not do the same thing. So the thing is that I can completely understand. For example, if you say that, look, we are only going to allow WHO approved vaccines. Even how the WHO is approving vaccines, I think leaves a lot of questions to be answered. Okay. These trashy Chinese vaccines or the Pfizer vaccine without adequate, as Dr. Joshi is saying, they've given the results out there, the kind of reactions which have come on the Pfizer vaccine, not even a fraction of that have come with the Covishield vaccine, right? And yet you have the Pfizer vaccine, because of big pharma and other things, being floated all over the world. So clearly, but even then, if you make that a standard that, okay, only WHO approved vaccines we will allow, fine. But that means that you should allow people who have got Covishield to travel to the UK with the same principles that you are giving to the Chinese, for example. What is the efficacy of the Chinese vaccines compared to Covishield? Let's talk about those figures. Let's talk about that data. I'm not a doctor. I'm not an expert. I'm not an epidemiologist. So I'm not even going to pretend to be one. But the fact
we actually have a vaccinologist on the panel, and since you've mentioned that twice, I'm going to take that to Dr. Jameel, because Sushant has said this twice in the course of this program, where he has questioned the efficacy of the Chinese vaccine. He's talked about whether WHO is being fair in the way it's okaying vaccines, and whether WHO's seal of approval should then be the final universal guideline that all countries follow, so that this kind of bickering does not take place. You want to respond to that, Dr. Jameel?
Well, first of all, efficacy is a very misunderstood word. Efficacy refers only to how a vaccine has worked during the trial period. If a vaccine is 90% efficacious during the trial, it doesn't mean that it remains 90% efficacious ad nauseum. It doesn't. So what is important is vaccine effectiveness. Once the vaccine is rolled out, how effective is it in preventing symptomatic disease? How effective it is in preventing severe disease, hospitalization, and mortality? And on that metric, pretty much all vaccines are similar. It doesn't matter whether you've taken a Pfizer or a Moderna or a Covishield or a Covaxin or a Chinese vaccine. All of them are not preventing symptomatic disease very well, but all of them are preventing severe disease and hospitalization very well. So that's the bottom line. That's the science. Unfortunately, we are running in too many directions on this without understanding and comparing figures like 90% to 80% or 85%. It makes no sense. Look at vaccine effectiveness. Look at what the vaccine will do to prevent severe disease and mortality. And on that metric, all vaccines are similar.
Yeah, and that's the science we should stick to. Frankly, if we get emotional, if we get political, if we get discriminatory with COVID-19 vaccines, then emerging from this crisis that has gripped the world for the last 2 years will be that much tougher. Stick to the science, stick to the data, and if you have prejudices, leave them at the door. That's really the only way forward. Let's hope better sense prevails soon. Thank you to all of you for joining us for the first discussion this evening as we're tracking that very important story.